Today is Wednesday, August 29th, 2012, and my name is Audrey Fishman Franklin, and I'm interviewing Laura Fischer. The interview is being filmed by Jenna Woods. This interview is being recorded for the Maria Rogers Oral History Program and the Boulder Jewish Oral History Project, whose mission is to document what Jewish life and the life of Jews were like in the mid-20th century. Boulder, a time when an influx of Jews created Boulder's first sustained Jewish community, which resulted in the establishment of the thriving Jewish institutions we have today. Laura was instrumental in this movement, and we thank her for helping to tell this story. First, Laura, could you tell us when and where you were born?
Yes, I can. I was born in the Bronx, New York in 1929.
And where did you grow up? Did you grow up there?
No, I didn't. I grew up in White Plains, New York.
And can you briefly describe your family and your neighborhood growing up?
My neighborhood and family are so deeply embedded in my heart that it's hard. My father came from Russia and had probably the first recycling business with a horse and buggy, but he had an accident and he lost his leg. So for health reasons, they bought a little store in a deprived black and white neighborhood in White Plains. And if you know White Plains, there's a demarcation between the rich and the poor. And so that's where I grew up, and the black people were very good to me. They took care of me. The white people called me Christ killer and made fun of my father's lameness and were cruel. And so this was my neighborhood, and we ate in back of the store, and in back of the store was a black stove, if I remember, a black stove, a black sink, and there was a big barrel of coal, and in the coal there was always a cat. And the cat always had kittens, and to soothe me, I would sit outside on a milk box and play with the kitten. And my father said, "Laura, you're going to have a Kutz cup," which means in Yiddish, you're going to have a cat's head. And so that's where I grew up. And do you have another question?
Brothers or sisters? Or
my sister is 9.5 years older than I, and she was my spark. She took care of me, and she took me to the movies, and she, as my life goes on, you'll see, very important to me. My whole life is intertwined with my sister.
How was your Jewishness expressed when growing up, and what part did Judaism or being Jewish play in your formative years?
Well, my father was a very spiritual man, and around the corner there was an Orthodox synagogue, and my father would go to Shabbat, and my mother would take care of the store. So when I was teased and I was taunted, I would run to the synagogue for refuge almost. And I was very good in Hebrew, and I would flirt with the boys. So actually, my father would sit at a certain place in the synagogue, and he had this beautiful shawl that he would drape over himself. But girls weren't allowed in, so So he would hide me under his tallis, and they knew I was there. And my mother worked, but on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and the high holidays, the women were upstairs, and I was upstairs with them. And none of them really knew Hebrew, but they would hold the prayer book and cry and talk to each other. But then, looking down, when I saw the rabbi with the long beard, and I didn't know him, but they gave aliyahs. And aliyahs are, my father deserved one. He had a beautiful voice and was very spiritual. But to get an aliyah, they auctioned it off. And so I was very angry that they equated spiritual life with money.
Yeah. Now, what was religiously or otherwise, what was of central importance to your family, do you think?
Well, I think because we lived in such a poor neighborhood, and that religion brought spark. I remember Hanukkah. Sorry. My father would make a menorah out of potatoes. He dug in the potatoes, and our gift were pennies, and chocolate. And that was very satisfying to me because I saw my mother and father kiss. My mother and father never went out for any kind of enjoyment. They worked from 7 to 2 in that store. And they were very good to the people there. My mother believed in charity. The people there were on welfare. And if your husband was around, they took off the welfare. I don't know how that works. But my father and mother would give bread and eggs to feed the kids, and for Passover, we always had a wonderful Passover. They would close the store, and I remember my mother going out on the porch. We lived someplace else beyond the store, and it was a greenhouse, and but anyway, she would be outside and rub the horseradish. And my sister remembers that I don't remember this, that there was carp in the bathtub because she made gefilte fish. And we always had a full table of relatives, and they would kid around, and my father and I would sort of not be very serious, and we would sing together, and I sang the 4 questions in Yiddish.
I bet you were good.
Yeah, and Purim was a good holiday too. We had my mother dressed me as Queen Esther, and it was a gay holiday. So the holidays were a spark in my life, but I didn't know what I was praying about until I went to college and I heard Shema Yisrael, listen, Hear, O Israel. And I said, oh, is that what it means?
Now that might lead us to, was being Jewish, I think you answered that, important to you, and is being Jewish important to you now?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Judaism is a part of my life that is private and gives me sustenance and joy and love. And I keep it. My husband wasn't interested in Judaism, though he was Jewish. But before we got married, we made an agreement that I would raise the children as vegetarian, and also as we would connect with Judaism.
Now, where did you live before you came to Boulder?
Well, I worked, when I graduated from college in 1951, I even taught before I graduated.
And where was that?
Pardon?
Where did you go to college and where did you teach?
Well, I went to Boston University from 47 to 51. But I went to the General College first, where they had integrated studies, and there I got my feeling for literature and art. They taught things in an integrated way. And then I knew that I had to make a living, so I went to the School of Education. I really wanted to be a writer, but I did go to the School of Education. And what was the question?
Well, I think you
Okay.
answered that. And when and how did you meet your husband, and when did you marry?
Well, while I was teaching, I lived with my sister, so and my brother-in-law had a cousin who was untouchable because he went to Harvard. And one day, my sister had a party, and this Danny was there, and I adored him and admired him. And the first thing he said, "Do you go to the symphony?" And I said to him, "Well, I have to take a bus and a train to get home. I don't have time with studying." He says, "Well, I think I know someone who you would like to meet, but he's very quiet and he doesn't date very much." And I said, "That's okay." So Erwin called me, and the usual, "What do you do?" And he said, "I'm a mathematician." I said, "Oh, I hate mathematics," because it kept me out of my college. And little did I know then that I had a nonverbal learning disability where I didn't integrate spatial relationships. But that was my field in later life.
And when did you get married?
Well, I met Erwin, first time Erwin came to the door, and I expected someone humped down and this handsome guy, and we went to the Hastings Putties Club at Harvard, where men dress up as girls, and then for Brigham Sunday, and we talked till 2 o'clock in the morning. And I knocked on my sister's door, and I said, "I'm going to marry him."
And what year was that? What year did you get married?
The same year. I met him in December. We got married in May.
And what year was that?
1954.
1954. Now, why and when did you come to Boulder?
Well, before I came to Boulder, I went to the University of Minnesota. My husband got a job at the University of Minnesota, and I taught a first and second grade near the stockyards in western Minnesota. I was freezing. They didn't let you wear slacks, or so they didn't let you wear socks, but you had to dress up. So I taught in St. Paul. And then my husband got a job at Dartmouth. But he didn't like Dartmouth, though. And I made a party, and I worked so hard. I was so young, and I had 2 cats. And the next day, all they could talk about was that my cats got on some professor's blue serge suit. So it was too closed a society for him.
And what led you to Boulder?
Well, Erwin applied for a job. We also applied, well...
And that was at the university?
Yeah. And he loved Boulder. They took him on a ride to Boulder Creek, and he just loved it. And I thought it was Boulder Dam.
You were surprised then.
Yeah.
Now, what was your family and friends' reaction to your moving to Boulder, Colorado?
Well, I don't think they Well, my family was upset that I would move so far. My parents weren't well, but we selfishly decided that we had to live our own life, because I was of the nature that if I was near my family, I would let them dominate me, and I would take care of them.
Now, did the Jewish community or lack of Jewish community influence your decision to move here?
To tell you the truth, I didn't even ask about the Jewish. Well, when Howard was born, he had to have a bris, and there was no rabbi. So the doctor did the bris, and I did the blessing. And
This was after you got here.
no, Howard was born in Hanover, New Hampshire.
Oh.
He was born when at the Winter Carnival.
Now, what was it like being Jewish in Boulder at that time? And this was what year you came to Boulder?
Came in 1959. You know, I was Jewish and committed and very, and I wanted Jewish surroundings, but I didn't have it in Minnesota or Dartmouth. And I didn't, my best friends as I was growing up, and this is a cliche, were not Jewish. And so I didn't think about it much. And then when I became pregnant with Maxine, there was a Hillel here. And I went to the Hillel, and someone said to me, Mazel Tov! And I hadn't heard that in years. And so I became very friendly with the Orthodox Rabbi Weitzner, with his wife. And she had 9 children. And so I took lessons from her. And then she would take me to Denver. They had an Orthodox women's group. And, well, here I am from Boulder, you know, what do I wear? Just be comfortable. Well, I got there and they were all dressed up, and it was a surprise to me. So, but I kept taking lessons with Naomi, and we loved each other, and we still are in touch.
And is that how, did you meet, is that the place where you met other Jewish people at the time, or?
No, that was...
Or were there not many Jewish
there
people?
weren't many, and they didn't gather together. Now, the fellowship, I guess I got involved with some people who wanted to have a Jewish fellowship, and we met in people's houses. But the people who were in the fellowship at that time just wanted it for cultural and ethical reasons. And Art Bernstein was in it, and he remains. And I don't know who else.
And that was about what year, or that the fellowship,
Well,
or that you went to Hillel, that there was a Hillel here,
Well,
and then
I went to
the fellowship.
I went to Hillel in 1959. Well, because we came in the summer of 1959, and my clothes weren't here, and the furniture wasn't here, and I was crying as I took Howard for a walk. We lived in Chautauqua because they wouldn't take cats. So a nun saw me, and she said, "Don't cry, my dear. Look up to the mountains and feel God." And there's that prayer, look up into the mountains. And then I knew that I had to relate to other people. And so I don't remember who was the leader, but it might have been Geltman or who wanted to do it. And so we met at the people's houses, and then
And what other activities did you do with the fellowship? And about how many people were there?
well, I think we were about 10 or 8, enough for a million. Actually, I think we had Hanukkah together, and I don't remember. I really don't remember.
Do you remember about how often you met?
Once a month.
Oh.
And then it was at that time that I went to Hillel.
So the fellowship came before or after?
After Hillel.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Although the Hillel rabbi is not encouraged to go out into the community.
And where did the other people in the fellowship come from, and how did you meet them initially, or how did you know about the fellowship?
Well, I think the fellowship came. There was no place to go to for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and there was no place to celebrate Hanukkah except in the homes. And I think it just spontaneously came as a need. So I wish I remembered who was the head. I think it was Kreith was in there, and Geltman, and I'm trying to remember who else. Maybe Nanette would remember, but she wasn't in the fellowship when it first started. But then they began to rent storefronts, and then they rented.
And where was the storefront?
1951. But then when IBM, I can't tell you, when IBM came in, there were more and more Jewish people who worked at IBM. I remember baking for the fellowship, but I don't remember.
Did the fellowship grow while you were part of it from the beginning?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it was the fellowship until it became Har HaShem.
And I understand the fellowship is still a part of the charter
Yes.
of Congregation Har HaShem.
But I may not be accurate. You can, but and then, you know, people came that were really interested in Judaism. I can't remember their name. They're now at Bonai Shalom. The Blooms came, and I can't remember her name. But anyway, if you call me, I'll get their name.
And was your social life in Boulder? So it was sounds like it was centered around friendships with all
The
people.
math department
The math.
and all people. Yes.
Okay.
And then I went to school.
And when did you start school?
Well, first I worked as a volunteer for the mentally retarded. After we lived in Chautauqua for 2 years, but every summer you had to move because the Texans came. And so after 2 years we decided to buy a house on Hawthorne Avenue, 1000 Hawthorne Avenue, right across from the Foothill School. So what was your question?
About when you went back to school, and why you chose your field, and if you tell us what your field was.
Well, my field, when I was in college, I took remedial reading. And when I was in Minnesota, I taught a first and second grade. And in Dartmouth, I taught a remedial 3rd and 4th grade, but that was in Lebanon. And so,
Lebanon, New Hampshire.
yeah, Lebanon, New Hampshire. So I was leaning toward. I always, because of my background, I always felt that I wanted to do something to help people, and children especially.
And what was your master's in?
It was in special education with special training and testing and prescriptive education.
Now, we've talked a little bit about this, but tell me, if you could, your level of involvement and why you got involved with the Jewish community in Boulder. What things you might have done, and why you joined.
Well, I had children that were growing up, and it was my commitment, and you teach them to your children in the Shema. I learned finally what Shema meant, and Judaism is very much a part of me. And that they went, we had no rabbi, and they went to Sunday school. So through Sunday school I learned there was Pollock there, and Claire Eudice was there, and Nanette was there, so that it developed, it snowballed.
And this was before Congregation Har HaShem, that your children had...
The building of Har HaShem, I think, was in 1968 or 69, and we were in Berkeley at that year. So, in Berkeley, my son learned language, he learned to steal, and there was the Black Panthers and Joan Baez, and they stormed Seder Gate. So we had quite an education. But, I'm very vague on dates with Har HaShem.
Can you tell me the path from the fellowship to the establishment of Congregation Har HaShem?
Well, the fellowship was very loose, and as more and more Jewish people came to Boulder through IBM, through scientific establishments, and like there were the Selbys, and they were the heart and soul of Judaism, and there's a library named after them. And so people began to talk on the phone, and we need to do this, we need to do that. I was not a leader at that time. I was a follower. I'm more a leader in my older years, but I was so grateful that someone could do it, and I remember my kids going to Har HaShem when it was built, and there was no rabbi. Howard had the first bar mitzvah, almost the first, I should say, almost. And he got lessons by Garden Schwartz in Denver. And though Irwin didn't like organized religion, he took him to Denver every week. And I wrote his service, and we had the sisterhood make stuff, and Edie Eston was in charge of it. The Estons. And we rented a tent. But in the interim, Howard went in the car and opened all his presents. So I still don't know who gave what. They didn't give huge presents like they do now. And so, the sisterhood and I and my sister and my mother-in-law, we made all the luncheon, and it was just lovely.
And where was that then? Where was the tent?
Outside Har HaShem. Well, there was room there because they didn't have the addition.
So that was in the
old synagogue.
In the old synagogue.
So about what year was that?
Well, Howard had his bar mitzvah in 1970. I got my master's degree the same year. I don't know how I did it. I really don't. They wanted me to go on for a PhD, but my family was too important.
Now, what other activities were you involved in Boulder?
Oh. Well, I was involved in the peace movement, Vietnam, and I joined the circle. They circled Rocky Flats, and I joined the circle with one of my best friends who died, Ann Trone, and we took a bus there, and we did. So I was active in that. I was, I'm trying to remember what I was active in. It was so long ago.
And actually, if we could go back to Har HaShem for just a little bit, I do want you to talk about the Old and Young Friendship Circle, and then the book that...
I don't remember when it was started.
It says 1977, was that? I think that's when it was.
Well, Lou Bloom used to lead the services. Levinsky, they were the ones that were. Levinsky, Lou Bloom, Pollock, and Sarah Jane Cohn came later.
And these are the people
that kept the services going. How I started the Old and Young was that I have within me, I don't think it's a gene or a DNA, but it's my background of my father and mother struggling and people struggling, and realization that that Judaism was important to me in my new life in Colorado, though my friends were not Jewish. They were from the math department, and I made dinners for them. You know, in fact, the one that was involved with the atomic bomb in Los Alamos, Ulam and Rick Meyer, they taught at CU, and I had them at my house. Now I can make a souffle, and we ate only vegetarian food. But what question you asking?
well, about the establishment of the Old and Young Friendship Circle.
Oh, well, it seems that I have the facility to give talks. So Lou Bloom asked me to give a talk, and I gave a talk on Rosh Hashanah, and I still think I have the notes someplace. I've moved a lot, and it was, do not forsake the hoary hair. Do not forsake the hoary hair. I have it more definite. And I began to notice in the community that there were Jewish people. They would come to services, and they came to be with their children because that was how, but their children never came to Har HaShem. Some did, some didn't. And they seemed very lonely. And I don't remember whether there was a rabbi. Yeah, there was a rabbi here, and I talked to him. Rabbi's 1977. I think it was Rabbi. We had one Reform rabbi from Denver, and you can check. I'm not sure. It would be Rabbi Steinberg at that time. So I gave a talk, and it was a good talk. And I said that I just don't want to talk. I want something to happen. So Gina was there, and I talked to
And
Gina.
explain to who Gina is, please.
That's it. And we decided on a tea, and we gave roses to all the women. Their children weren't particularly involved with Har HaShem. They turned to the Buddhist religion, and some turned to Christianity, which crushed these people. And so we decided on the third Thursday of the month, and this is still the Thursday of Zikne, and we had about 10 to 20 people come. And they brought their own lunch, and we had speakers, and we had dancing and music. One lady, Ida, what was her name? I can't remember her name. Her first name was Ida. Would play the piano, and it was and Paula Moore was in the group. Not when it first began, but I was in graduate school and I was working also, but I would get that Thursday off, because I had been involved with I started the Learning Disability program at CU. That's another program, but Homer Page would give me time off. And so the old and young participated in Hanukkah and Purim, and they really looked forward to this.
It sounds like it met a great need.
Yeah, and we did a book together, Life Stories of the Old and Young. And in back of it is my grandson, who was born. My husband died a month after my grandson was born, so he was at risk. So the story of the old and young is in this book.
It's a wonderful accomplishment,
Yes.
Laura, that you put that
But Angela
together.
Thaler had a daughter who did this kind of work, and she encouraged it. I never was president of Old and Young. I always wanted to oversee it and see how things are going. But we had a lot of cooperation from Gina.
And we should say Gina Hyatt was the office
Gina
administrator
Hyatt,
at Har HaShem.
Hanukkah, we would have a Hanukkah celebration, and we collected money from the old and young. They would give $1, 50 cents, and with that money, we bought Gina a Hanukkah gift, and we had a Hanukkah party.
Now, what changes have you seen from the early days of the establishment of the Jewish community in Boulder to the present? And can you comment and reflect on that?
Well, people respect me at Har HaShem, and they call me a founder. But at that time, I was going to graduate school and working, so I couldn't be as active in Har HaShem as other people like Nanette.
And who was that?
Nanette. She was
Nanette Mannheimer.
But that was many years after the fellowship. But I was always there. My daughters got confirmed there, and Howard got bar mitzvah there. And Saida and I were very good friends. She loved me and I loved her. And she loved Mozart and I loved Mozart. And her husband worked for the Bureau of Standards.
Now,
Bureau of Standards. It's
and
now
who is
called
the Said?
NIST.
And what was Said's last name?
Selby.
Selby. Okay.
So, what was the question?
About the changes.
When Rabbi Rose came here, there was great...
The first Rabbi Rose. Or the
Old Rabbi.
Old Rabbi Rose, right? Yeah.
There was conflict, and Rabbi Steinberg, I thought he was wonderful, but some people, well, anyway, it's very political. But Rabbi Rose came, and when Rabbi Steinberg was here, whom I loved, there were a group of people that felt they wanted something more religious. They wanted a Saturday service. So they formed sort of a fellowship, and it's the result of Bonai Shalom. And that was a very hurtful time for me, because I could have gone to Bonai Shalom. I loved the people. We were especially friendly, my husband and I, with the Safrans, but I decided to stay at Har HaShem, because I love the friendliness and the smallness, and that's where I belong. But I visited other synagogues too.
Now, what do you think caused the growth of the Jewish population here?
The mountains, as well as the scientific institution here. When IBM came, that was the start. Don Margolis became friendly, and he's an organizer. He and I think that Barbara started the sisterhood. So that, and then the scientific institution and the university. There were many Jews at the university, but they had no means of expression. Neither did they want to. Some came to the fellowship, but when the institution was built, then we got a few more university people. And I think the growth came as a result of the change of demography in Boulder, and the growth came with Rabbi Bronstein. Rabbi Bronstein brought heart and soul and growth, because they loved her. But then we interviewed students to come, and Rabbi Rose was one of he was just finishing his training. But then Rabbi Bronstein became ill.
Now tell me how...
She did my husband's eulogy. It was just beautiful.
Now, how has the experience of being Jewish in Boulder changed with not only Har HaShem, but with all the growth that's taking place in many institutions?
You know, I don't think that Boulder has changed in its attitude toward Jewish people. My children grew up as Jewish, and we had Hanukkah with our neighbors. They came to my Passover Seder. I think that I think that people were curious and didn't know what a Jew was. But you don't tell what a Jew is by talking about it. You invite people. You engage them. And so I did that, and there was some conflict with the schools, with carols. But you know, I'm a cockeyed optimist. I like carols. And so, but you know, my children felt somewhat isolated at Christmas, because there was Christmas and they were vegetarians. So, and Howard always wanted a Christmas tree. So my friend Ann Trone, who did the peace thing, chopped down Christmas tree and brought him a branch, and he would decorate it, and I would leave a gift for him. My girls didn't want a tree, because by that time the synagogue was established, and they had a Hanukkah and Purim, and they even had a Passover. I used to do Passover Seders for the Unitarian Church. But what was your question?
Well, what has the experience of being Jewish in Boulder changed? But you're saying it was...
I think it's the experience of being Jewish from Jewish people in bringing in lectures and respecting holidays. I think that education, I mean by example and education and engagement, that the attitude of the people, we need not forget that a lot of people came from the East or West or Midwest, where Judy and the commitment to a synagogue is quite different in Boulder than it is in East.
And how is that, do you think?
Well, it's supporting the synagogue. The people here come to get away from the East and its behavior in the East, and probably, from the rituals in the East, and they make their own rituals here. But I think that the people here, those that admit they're Jewish, are proud of being Jewish. They have children. They need bar mitzvahs. And the bar mitzvah is what bar and bat mitzvah, please, Maxine and Lisa, forgive me, is what brings people to the synagogue, and whether they stay or not is moot. It's very different.
Now, for kind of a final question, I certainly think, and many other people think, that you had a lot to do with the explosion, really, of Jewish life, whether it be the congregations, which led to the Jewish Community Center, which led to Allied Jewish Federation presence here, and on and on. Can you reflect on that, your part at the very beginning of...
I'm trying to remember, and don't forget I'm 83 years old, and my memory isn't that good.
But do you kind of acknowledge the part that you made? Yeah.
There were very few people here. I was at the university, and they always called me to find out when the Jewish holidays were, so that they wouldn't have classes. And I wear Judaism, but spiritually, I don't wear it on my sleeve. So there was a woman who was a Unitarian who wanted me to do a Seder. And so I did a Seder, and we sent away for a modern Seder, and I knew Hebrew, so I could sing Hebrew. We didn't have our beautiful holly at that time. And I've been here, I've been loyal, I've been committed, and I was put on the, I wasn't that active in sisterhood. I don't like groups, actually. I guess I was respected, I don't know.
But what do you think of the growth of Jewish life from when you came to now?
Yeah, well, it's tremendous. And I was on the, someone selected me to be on the selection committee for Rabbi Bronstein. And I remember at the interview, we had a telephone interview, and her voice was so soft. And I said, I don't think she can deal with that board. I used to be on the board with Rabbi Rose, the older Rabbi Rose, with Nordstuben. And I was around. I was on the education committee. I went to Purim things. I did things with my children. I was there.
Yeah.
And so when Rabbi Bronstein came and we selected her, she too was a vegetarian. So I was asked to make vegetarian food, and I loved her. She's the closest thing to God that I can find. I mean, she's got a marvelous soul. And so the old and young were here at that time, and Paula Moore was president. Rabbi Bronstein gave talks to the old and young, and she gave readings, but there was no connection. I mean, they felt, it was time for a change. And so I grew with Rabbi Bronstein, and she knows that.
Yeah.
Although
Now,
I consider myself a hypocrite because I don't observe all the holidays. I don't observe all the rituals.
Now, do you have anything else you'd like to share with us before we end the interview?
I think that it's important to know that I devoted my life to special education and Judaism. If I had a hierarchy, I would say, and I'm not sure what God is either. I don't think that God is anthropomorphic. I think it's a spirit within you and a dialogue with a higher being. And I've taken lessons. I've done a lot of exploring.
And your work...
And so my hierarchy would be the unknown, my family, Judaism, and my career. And so I went back to school and got my degree and was hired for a special ed class with 17 learning disabled 13-year-old boys, and I fell on my face. So I decided to go into testing. And there was a woman here, Cecile Lazar, who worked at the center and highly respected. Do you know Joe Lazar? Well, I loved her. And she said, we need a volunteer to test. And so I tested, and I was good at it. That was where I belonged, one-to-one. I'm not a good disciplinarian. I'm not. Howard had a bit of a, he's great now, but he had some troubles in school. So I went back to school and learned about it. And then when we were in Berkeley, I joined the Neurological Society, and I volunteered at an all-black school for Kephart and Getman. That was all muscle, all kind of hand-eye coordination. And my daughter went to a black nursery, but it wasn't her going, that wasn't a good idea. But anyway, I became interested in special ed, and I did testing for the mental health center. Then I went into private practice called LAMP. I can't remember what it stands for, but if you want to know, I have a card. And I started deviating toward adults, and I wrote a self-acknowledging diagnosis where I asked the person, why are you here? And I could tell by their writing and answers, and so they could see why they were here. And I always said, you're great up here, and down here is where you're weak, and we need to bring a balance. So anyway, this woman that I did had never read, and so I taught her how to read. She was a beautician, and she did the nails of a blind woman. And the blind woman worked for Homer Page, who was blind. And he said to me, if you can do the diagnosis of Terry Gorski and give her instructions, I'll hire you. And I did. So I started the Learning Disabilities program at the University of Colorado. And I was a pioneer in the field. But I was crazy. I never published because I felt, this is mine. I don't want to share it, but I should have published, And now there are learning disability programs all over the world.
So you were a pioneer in that area as well as being a pioneer in the Boulder Jewish community too.
Well, I love Judaism, and I love teaching, and I love children, students still come to see me.
Laura, thank you very, very much for
I've talked
talking
so
to
much.
us today. It was a wonderful time together. Thank you.
You're welcome.